Okay, our Devcon's been sitting for about 10 minutes or so. It kind of depends on how it was mixed. I'm sure it depends on atmospheric conditions, humidity, temperature, and all that. But right in there, I usually give it about 10 minutes. You can tell it stays green for a little while, but right now you can tell it's not super hard, but it's definitely set up. Now, that was just on the flat surfaces, the pretty easy to access surfaces. To run the Devcon down this little bead here, I don't want to just gorp a whole bunch in there and have it get up inside the tack rail detail and all that. So this stuff's really hard to work with as far as making it go exactly where you want it to go, and it's really hard to understand or describe it until you've actually worked with it. So you can't really force it to go where you want it to go. You can kind of manipulate it and corral it a little bit. So in situations like this, I like to grab some masking tape, and what we're going to do is basically tell the Devcon where it's not allowed to go, which we don't want it to go up into the tack rail. I'll even do this little bit here for convenience. And just for the heck of it, to make it a little easier, I'm going to put a little bit here so it focuses everything right into that little crack that we're working with, instead of, in the course of trying to work it in, it just spreads out onto the flat area. So we'll do the same thing on the other side of this seam. And we'll give it a little room to work. And do the same thing on the other side. And this is basically just going to keep it from getting into everything. And we'll probably end up doing this same technique in some of these other more complex areas when we're working with some of the more intricate areas. At least this gives a basic idea of kind of what we're doing. And I'll put one across the back. Put that guy right there. Now what we're going to do is, now that we have some areas kind of protected, we're going to apply the Devcon, and then we're going to take some saran wrap, or whatever brand you happen to have. Just this cling wrap for, keeping your vegetables fresh after the party and all that. And what we're going to do, apply our Devcon into that hole there, and since it's hard to kind of spread and pack it in with the stirring stick just by nature of the way it acts, we're going to take some saran wrap and put it over the joint, and what we can do is massage the saran wrap across and kind of work it in. It'll kind of stick to the saran wrap while it's curing, but after it's cured you can peel the saran wrap off and you'll have a smooth, kind of retained, whatever shape you push the stuff into. Instead of having a big bead or a big wad that you have to sand down, you can kind of work it in and smooth it out a little bit and kind of keep it under control. So we're going to do that here. That'll also kind of help push it down into the seam a little better. We could have done that here, but it wasn't really necessary. So we'll go ahead and mix up another batch of this stuff. Okay, looks pretty consistent. So we'll go ahead and try to grab a little bit. We'll just put it up here. And as you try to push it in, it just kind of gushes everywhere, and then when you draw it back out, it pulls it back out. So we'll try to get as much kind of in the area as we can. And it's not going to look perfect, it's just kind of a matter of getting it close. And yeah, I'm going over the seam between the two shells here, but I'm not too concerned because you can cut that out real easy with a hobby knife, either after it's cured or even when it's still green, when it's still curing. So go ahead and get that dabbed on there. Looks like we've got enough to just maybe make it through. So now that it's kind of in the area, we'll take our cling wrap stuff and kind of lay it over. Pull it tight just to get the wrinkles and stuff out. And then I'm just going to start here and just kind of push it along and kind of slowly work it across. And there'll probably be voids and bubbles and weird things like that. But this is more just to kind of keep the Devcon kind of contained and kind of where you want it as much as possible. And just kind of push it around and kind of work it down into the crack where the seam is, where that joint is. Work it around. And it'll probably look real weird because you're going to have impressions of the subtle wrinkles and waves and stuff in the material, but don't get too crazy about that because we're still going to have to sand it out and maybe even add a little bit more because we still have to pluck out the hot glue and all that. But this is just to get the majority of it kind of covered, and we'll come back and touch things up later. So we're just going to let that set aside once we're happy with it. And it'll cure a little slower with the wrap on it, but wait till it's pretty solid, then you can peel it off and it'll breathe better, and then it'll cure a little quicker after that. So we'll let that rest for a couple minutes, and we'll get ready to peel that plastic off. Okay, the Devcon should be pretty solid. Even though it's under the wrap, I can use the leftovers that are on the card here and tell that it's not hard, but it's pretty close to being set up, so we should be able to peel the wrap off. Just being careful to make sure you don't pluck out any that happens to be kind of tucked into a wrinkle or something. Just pull it out nice and easy, and it's not really stuck on any better than, say, if it was just, cling wrapped to, leftovers or something. But there's no residue, really. I mean, there's a slight bit of residue on here, but I still wouldn't reuse it. So just toss that to the side. This here is still just a bit green. It's solid, but it's still just a little soft. So we'll let, which actually we could probably go ahead and peel the tape too. Just be nice and easy to it. Just gonna pull nice and, well, that's what I get for using junk tape. Since the Devcon's still green, then you want to peel a tape up pretty easy, just like you would be if you're peeling up tape after a paint job, to make sure you don't, peel anything up. And this tape's wanting to fall apart, which is why you don't buy masking tape when it's on sale or on clearance, because that probably means it's been sitting around forever. It's not as sticky as it needs to be, and it's probably going to rip easily. So, lesson learned, which is why I don't use this tape on paint jobs or things that matter a whole lot. And there we go. Now, you probably can't tell on the camera, but that kept, like, if you look at this seam, it's kind of all gooey and nasty. Looks like boogers and chewed bubble gum on this seam. Whereas here, it's down in a nice little stripe. It still has its irregularities, but it's a lot more contained and confined and easier to work with. That way we're not having to sand and file all over the place. We can just kind of favor just working right in that little corner and just cleaning that up nice. So it's still, like I said, still just a bit tacky still. So we'll let it sit a bit longer until it's finally cured, and then we'll take a look at it. Okay, feels like it's pretty cured. So now, I suppose what we can do is open it back up. That'll expose the inside of the seam, and that's good. We see some gushing down through. That's good. That means that our joint, or our adhesion, isn't just on the top layer, it's actually down through the middle. And so it's the face of the two pieces of plastic that are actually bonded, and not just some kind of stuff slapped over the top. Which is good. This gives us a chance to push out and get the hot glue out now that we have a good solid bond holding everything together. Get that glue pulled out. Then we'll apply some from the back. Get that all Devconed up as well, so we have a good solid joint on both sides. And then I think we can get ready to move on to the next piece. Alright, now depending on how you went about working around your glue, depends on what tools you're going to use to get it out. If you're a little more careful, I guess, you could have left enough room on either side you can just grab onto it and yank it out. But for here, I'm going to give it a shot to just try to push it from the back side until I can get a hold of it with tweezers, or I've got these like surgical clampy scissor things, because they've got nice small jaws, but you have to have a good even clamping force, where sometimes you get sometimes with needle nose pliers you don't have quite the you're not quite as articulate, what's the word, on the end. So next game is just getting our glue globs out by whatever means possible. Just work all over, and whether you get them from the inside or outside depends on how you glued it together in the first place, but let's get that glue out of here. We don't need that anymore. Okay, now we've got the glue all picked out. You can see we kind of have like an abbreviated line, or holes where the glue was. I'm going to go ahead and either fill those, or we could even just go ahead and fill in the inside, just to fill in any voids. Because like I said, it's hard to get the Devcon to go everywhere you want it to. So it's good to get both sides. It doesn't really matter how bad it looks on the inside, since there's not going to really be any internals back in here in this area too much. So you just kind of slather it around wherever you want, I guess. So I think I'll go ahead and just do the same thing, just mix it up the same way, spread it on the same way. Go ahead and close it up and get these pieces, little bits touched up, and be ready to move on, I think. Okay, I think I've got the seams pretty well covered, but we're going to go ahead and stick them together just to kind of set the stage for the future. One thing to keep in mind when you're working with this stuff, it is pretty potent smelling. I don't think it'll kill you dead. I'm working in the garage right now, and I've got the door open. Generally when I work with this stuff, I'm in one room of the house, but I usually try to keep the window open. I've never met any talking animals while I've worked with this or anything, but it's better to be safe than sorry. So make sure it's well ventilated where you're working, and just take the general, the typical precautions when you're working with weird chemicals that are hard to pronounce and worse to spell. So while that's curing, we're going to go ahead and take a peek at what the future looks like. And really what we accomplished here is just basically moving this, back, filled in this weird flat spot with the tack rail. Next step is taking this piece that has the drop down, where we're going to start looking into the jam door. Again, if it's under like that. This piece had little risers that it stood on, like that, and I just sized it up, lined everybody up, and then just trimmed it off. And I was able to trim along the side of an internal structural piece, and so I know these pieces are flat or flush, which helps because we know this piece is flush as well, so we can just drop that right on. We don't have to worry so much about trying to make sure this lines up beautifully. We want to make sure it's close, but we don't have to be crazy about it. But if we line that up, then we can see that we have a body line that comes through here, which is really going to help, because that'll give us an instant mark we can go off with our straight edge when we're lining this thing up. Just like I said, this should be a pretty good guide, but that'll just double check everything. And we see this guy lines up with the top of the tack rail, but that's going to be the next piece we work with. So once this is cured, I don't want to move it around too much until this is good and cured, just to be safe. It shouldn't go anywhere because it is tacked in from the first batch of Devcon we applied. But this is going to be the next step. We'll go ahead and do the same thing we did with this piece to this piece. Double check, make sure our alignment's all good to go. We'll tack it in place with the hot glue, come back through, hit it with some Devcon, let that cure, pull the glue out, tack it from the back, tack it up, or finish kind of sealing the joint with the Devcon. And then things are about to get interesting, because once that's in place, then we get to start looking into this guy that we talked about earlier, and start looking into trimming this bottom off. Because once this guy's in place, we have to kind of decide how we're going to treat lining this guy up. So we'll get this guy in place and we'll address that in a minute. Just a quick thought while I was working, whether you're shaving the plastic or you're working with the Devcon or some kind of body filler, working with a file, it's going to get loaded up, and usually you can tap it out and that does pretty good. But especially Devcon gets pretty sticky, you know, when you're sanding on it, and it gets down into the teeth on the file, and it kind of cuts down the effectiveness of the file. And so I have just a cheap wire brush, probably came from Harbor Freight, can't remember, that I use, and if you just kind of sweep it along, kind of along with the grain or the direction of the teeth, just kind of that slight angle, it cleans it right out and keeps it kind of working at peak efficiency. So it's always nice to have one of those kicking around somewhere on your table while you're working. Okay, got that guy tacked into place with the hot glue. Get ready to put some Devcon on it. So all of our Devcon is dry now, and it's all been applied on the inside of the seams, as well as the outside all the way around. It's pretty solid. We'll go back and reinforce things later on, but this at least gets us the solidified stock area that we're working with. So now we can start moving forward and start getting ready to work on, you know, the magwell area, moving up to the barrel. Now we'll start to figure out what we have to work with for an underbarrel, or, you know, what we're going to do with the main barrel and things like that. We can start visualizing and kind of start roughing things out for the final shape. So since we're at this point, let's go ahead and start sizing up the strife, so we kind of know what we're working with, and as far as starting to fit the two shells together, now that this part is pretty solid. And like we talked about before, I'm going to try to stick with the Centurion grip and try to fit the strife mechanical parts inside. And I'm thinking what I can do, where most of the kind of the traditional Strife-Turion platform is, you know, you just cut the grip out entirely and fit the strife in. That puts, since the Centurion's a much taller blaster because it's the mega caliber, the barrel is higher in the shell. So if we line up the strife kind of where it would be in a traditional Strife-Turion setup, then that puts the barrel, you know, lower in the shell. Here, let's stick that guy there. Line that guy up roughly. So if you line that up, you can kind of see what I'm talking about the barrel misalignment. So I'm planning on, at least the plan of attack I have for remedying the situation, is to set the strife itself up higher. I'm going to have to build a new mount for the micro switch, since this grip doesn't have provisions for anything like that. But there's this great big piece of trigger linkage here that I think we can take the top piece of the strife that actually has the bit that moves the actual pusher mechanism. I think we can cut the top off that, basically cut the top section of the trigger off, and stick it to this bit of trigger linkage here, being able to use the Centurion trigger and everything, so all this trigger components work, and then just stick the strife stuff to the top. That's going to move the mag well up a little bit, but I'm going to have to build a new mag release anyway, so we can kind of work around that, I'm thinking. Looks like we'll have to trim part of the rail off here and shave a little bit off the top of the shell. But now we get to start looking into now the actual merge process starts. You know, really all the work we've done up to this point is just making the Centurion itself shape different so we can still do the same integration that we would have if we had done the traditional cut the front end off and mold the back end to the strife. So let's take this guy, and I trimmed a little bit off of the jam door just so we can kind of get a rough idea of the fit. And like I mentioned before, I trimmed this off and cut the front end off a little bit so it tucks in tighter up to the front and should look better overall, I think. So let's kind of line this guy up a little bit. We're still going to cut the bottom end off this, but we kind of need to know where we're going like 2 steps ahead before we commit to cutting too much off here. Otherwise we can really be up a creek. So let's put that guy kind of approximately where we want it and start sizing up the strife. We want basically the barrel to end up being, of the strife to be right in the middle of the hole where the the Centurion barrel is. So we want to stick it, so you line up the grip, mag well, and oh shoot. That puts the flywheel cage kind of too close to the top. Okay. Now wait a minute. Okay, this. Okay. Did not foresee that one. Might be easier to show this side. Basically, if we kind of stick this guy in the neighborhood and bring this guy in, you can kind of see the problem we're looking at, where the top of the top flywheel is sticking through, which some of that will be covered up by this piece on the Centurion, is kind of before it turns into the actual barrel detail. But okay, the problem we're looking at here is just because this top piece here isn't really wide enough to accept or give you room for the flywheel cage. You can technically almost fit a flywheel in there, but the mounting ears are going to stick out, which, man, that'll look super tacky. If we could favor the rear part a little bit, then you'd have flywheels kind of sticking out in the jam door a little bit. But actually, it looks like the back might cover, barely, but it's going to be hanging out the front. Just thinking we might stretch this just a little bit by adding another piece that we cut out, which there again, guess I should have been a little more conservative with my cuts when I was shrinking this down, but I didn't even foresee this. And that's one problem, kind of starting to chew into a project this big, where you're taking something this long and making it this long. You don't take into account some of the little things like this little bump. That's not going to be big enough to fit flywheels into. So what we could do, we got a couple options. We could go ahead and favor or leave this kind of where it's at on the short side and then build. So what we got here? We could open this up and extend this forward a little bit, and which will cover up part of the barrel material. We'll have to cut that back and build something up here, which we might be able to fabricate out of some other pieces of the shell, but that's kind of its own shape. It's a lot boxier than the rest of the shell. Got some of the mag weld, but we want to try to maintain that, because I'm gonna try to see if we can just cut a section out in the middle and shorten it up, which that wouldn't give us much to work with either. We could. One option is we could lower the strife back down, and instead of trying to just take the Centurion and shorten it up overall, leaving the barrel kind of up in the upper section, kind of higher up, we could use kind of the dimensions or the layout of the traditional strife Centurion and fit the trigger, line up the triggers basically, and just cut just the very top portion of the trigger off, just the actual part that connects to the linkage, and stick it to the top here. And that'd leave the the form, I guess, of the strife there. That'd leave the mag release in a spot where we can get to it easy enough still, and might be easier to work with. That'd leave the mag weld lower, which will give us more to work with for adding the mega stuff to it. It might kind of help the aesthetics and the balance a little bit. And then just basically lower the barrel a little bit. Basically put the strife in the Centurion and then put the barrel on the strife, as far as the kind of proportion and layout of how things are looking. So if we take and say, okay, we got that guy, and instead of having the barrel, like up here, if we brought it down a little bit, well, that screws up the jam door, but what we could do is take this, there's a body line right through here, right below the little cutout for the jam door. We could leave the jam door lined up here, so we'd still have the jam door to remain unaffected, and we could add some material. We could take this guy, draw a line here, and lower the actual barrel, which, well, we'll have to do a little trimming to this guy here, just because there's a slight curve to the front of this, and drop it down a little bit. Boy, just when I thought we had things figured out, suddenly we have a lot of different options, and none of them are the original plan. We could even just kind of wrap up the aesthetics of what we had going, and instead of trying to use, go ahead and just stick this guy on here, and just not even use the Centurion barrel, go with more of that kind of SMG or whatever, where you got stock and kind of a snubbier nose on it, kind of like the simpler strife Centurions, and just lower the barrel in the opening, and just maybe where you have this round cutout here, just kind of cut the bottom off, and then lower the barrel, down a little bit, which has potential. I guess this is the important thing to remember when you're starting an integration project, is that you can have a beautiful picture in your head, and that doesn't always mean the blaster is going to be like, yeah, that's a great idea. Sometimes the blasters say, screw you, I don't want to play along. And that's kind of what we're hearing right now. So, tentatively, let's look at, boy. So if we go with this route and just line up the grips and put that there, that drops the flywheels down to where they shouldn't be an issue, and that actually drops them down below the level of the barrel thing here, so we wouldn't have to modify it the way that fits. But that also puts the actual strife barrel below the barrel we're looking at, which doesn't really help, because then you'll have like cool, cosmetic barrel. And then the business end sticking out just below. So that, I'm thinking, is out. We could go with, like I said, we'll just forego the Centurion big barrel, and we'll go a little more compact on the front. Just integrate that guy in the way we had planned. And then we'll have the barrel, the strife barrel, just kind of hanging out below just a little bit, and then we'll do something cosmetic here. We could take some of these pieces and kind of fill in that area. Put that guy in like that. Then you still have a bit of a rail sticking out. That'd give us a chance to play with these guys if we wanted to, and still have that kind of a cool thing. Have that guy come out, and we could like bring these guys in, you know, cut them off, and have that come down. So you'd have like actual strife barrel, and you could have these guys on either side, and this piece just kind of tucks in here, and we could extend this, you know, put an extension of some kind on the strife, and have this kind of here, and like that, which that might not look horrible either. Because I was pretty excited about putting an underbarrel on here, but the fellow that I'm building it for also talked about putting a grip. We might be stuck with that. So, I guess at the end of the day, we have lots of options. And what do you do when you have lots of options? You sit down, you consider them for a long time, and figure out which is the best route to go with. So, I guess we'll do some pondering, and I'll look at some other options, and we'll meet back up here later. And when you have a lot of options, quite often I'll, in situations like this, I'll set it aside for a minute, work on another project for a while, and that gives me a chance to just kind of totally clear out all of my other ideas and preconceived plans, and kind of takes off that personal bias of this is what I originally wanted to see, and now I can't do that. So I'll just kind of completely push it aside for a little bit, do something else for a while, and kind of purge all of my ideas out. Do that for a couple of days, then come back and have it be able to look at it with fresh eyes and kind of see it as a new project again, and hopefully have a better idea, be able to maybe have some fresh ideas, like I said. And so, well, I guess it'll be a couple days before we get back to that, but we're gonna beat this thing. Just you wait.